Dr. Noeline Prince. So she is a mechanical engineering graduate from Moratuwa. And then after her PhD, she was a senior lecturer at Ruhuna University. And right now she is at the University of Minnesota as a scientist in biomedical engineering. And she is, I think, the first biomedical chartered engineer in Sri Lanka. So we are very happy to have Dr. Noeline here with us. So over to you, Dr. Noeline, when you can start the lecture.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I'm also seeing if the sound is working. Right, thank you. I appreciate you having your videos on so that we can have a little bit more interaction. It's a small class. I'm also sorry about your friend who passed away. I just got to know from Dr. Kulasinghe. Right, okay. We're going to do some group work. So what I would like for you to do at the beginning is to put your group number. Do you all know what your group numbers are? Yes or no?
Perhaps it was sort of unofficially sent to me by the rep. So perhaps you don't have the group number yet, but I will put the list that the batch rep sent.
Okay,
And
I
in the
can,
chat, and you can
if it's the
repeat
same
it.
one, yeah. So put the group numbers, and then what I can do is I can split you up into those groups, or I can just read out the names. Right, so put the number in front, and what I'll do is I will split you up into groups, and we'll do some activities, right? Okay. How's the second year? Okay, so let me take me off of Spotlight and try to see all of you. Okay, so good morning again. Nice to see your lovely faces early morning. We're going to have 1 hour today and then 2 hours on Friday. If you interact with me and give me answers or ask questions and help to move the lecture along pretty fast, we might be able to stop sooner than 3 hours, right, for the entire section. Right, so while I put you to different groups, tell me what you have learned so far in this module. What have you learned about design? Or what are you expecting to learn about biomedical design? So we're gonna continue lesson 6 or the section 6 in biomedical device design. And this section is on safety precautions, ethics, and regulatory aspects. So as far as the learning outcomes for these 3 hours, as I mentioned, 1 hour today, 2 hours on Friday, and the more you interact with me and answer quickly, we might be able to cut it short, less than 3 hours. We're going to apply the safety aspects in biomedical device design into a product design. And I would like for you to think about your own designs that you have. Secondly, we are going to articulate some ethical issues in biomedical engineering. And finally, understand the regulatory control of biomedical devices. We will look at some world standards and a few of the Sri Lankan standards. Now, this content, it's really broad. Just the last section only is like a 3-credit module. So there's no way that I can cover everything in 3 hours. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview and try to give you some practical aspects, what you can apply to your project, as well as some knowledge on some of the regulatory aspects so that if you need to, you could go search further and learn about it more. And maybe in your 3rd year or 4th year, you might come across more of this. So this is the outline that we'll be going through. The safety aspect, we'll talk about what FMEA and risk management is. And then we'll go over some ethics. I might not be able to complete all of ethics today, and whatever I finish up to today, and then Friday we'll go over the remaining ethics and the regulatory aspects. So coming into the safety aspects, What are the questions you ask regarding your project when you think of the safety aspect? So all of these answers that you gave are right and good, but I want to just categorize all of these questions into 3 sections. One, is my product safe for the patient? Is my product safe for the users? I'm not sure if you have done this. Have you done the difference between the user and the patient? Quick yes or no. Well, if you're thinking of the X-ray, the patient is the one who goes inside the X-ray. But the user is the one who presses the button, the one who arranges everything for the patient. Now, the patient only goes in once every 6 months or once every 3 years to get an X-ray. But the person who's operating that X-ray machine is there multiple times a day. That person is doing X-rays. So the user gets exposed to more radiation than the patient itself. So how do we minimize the risk and how do we make sure that the equipment is safe for the user? So that's the difference between the patient and the user. What are the risks associated with my design? Later, I will mention something called process and design. And in this class, we are going to solely focus on the design aspect of this because it's a design class. But when it comes to the processes, it's very similar, except you think about the process rather than the actual design process. I'll explain it later. And then the really important thing, especially as engineers, is it's important for us to find out what are the risks and how safe our equipment is, but how do we communicate that? How do you report those findings precisely, honestly, and completely? So sometimes, now when you go into your internships, your training, you will find some ethical dilemmas that companies have knowledge of the entire risks involved, but they will only reveal part of that information to the public. So now that is very unethical. If they have that full information about a product, they are obliged. It's their duty to report that in completion, precisely and honestly. Right? So I'm going to give you some very funny examples, but these are all designs. Now, these are not designs in the biomedical sector, but nevertheless, these are designs that somebody came up with. What do you think about this? Have any of you come across a cup like this? Wonderful design, wonderful idea for a cat lover or whatever, animal lover, but you don't want to create more hazards or more problems after using the product. This person would be blind and would need to go to the ER. Sometimes the design problems can be fixed with a little creativity. We can just paint over it. Sometimes we only find out after we go to use the product that this design is completely failing. The one part of the design, the engineers that did one part of the design did not communicate with the engineers that did the other part of the design. And then you come up with some kind of solution to mitigate that disaster. Sometimes it's not even funny, it's a safety hazard. I can't imagine anybody trying to go up these stairs, right? So these are some of the designs that we see in social media, but some of these I have actually seen for myself. And I can't believe that engineers do come up with such things. Right. So when we think about the safety, there's something called the root cause analysis or the Ishikawa diagram or the fishbone diagram. Have any of you seen this? Maybe like in second semester, you may have done it for one of the mechanical engineering classes. So this is basically the cause and effect. So the problem, the final problem was there was no flow from the pump. So you ask the question, why? Why was there no flow from the pump? So you can have problems that are due to the methods. You can have problems that are due to the material. You can have problems that are due to the people, due to the environment, due to the machinery, so on and so forth. And when you go down each of these parts, so you can see this is like a fishbone. This is a concept that's coming from manufacturing engineering in Japan that's useful to get to the bottom of things. I'm going to show you the same thing in a slightly different format. So how I'm going to show it to you is in a table format. Oops. Right. So this is called the FMEA. I should have written down that name. Failure Modes Effects Analysis. Right? I have it written down somewhere in the slide. So we take a problem, or we take the design and we break it down into subcomponents. So since you don't have your projects yet, I'm going to think of, let's say, a motorized wheelchair. Right? So think about a motorized wheelchair and all the components that go into it. So the power supply is one component. What are the failure modes associated with the power supply? Right? First, what is the function of the power supply, and then what are the failure modes associated with it? You can think about the wheels. What's the function of the wheel? What are the failure modes associated with that? And basically what you want to do is to fill out this chart. Right? How clear is this? Are you able to take like a screenshot of this? Because this is your group work. I want each of the groups, think of the motorized wheelchair and come up with two subsystems. All of you should not come up with the battery and the wheels. Think of the different subcomponents or the subsystems, more than just the component. Think of the subsystem of the motorized wheelchair and put it here. So system 1, system 2, and then inside each system, think of what are the ways that things can fail. So for example, I'm going to take the power supply example again. Power supply does not charge, right? So the function of the power supply is to give the required voltage. So inside that, one of the failure modes is that it does not give the required voltage or gives a lower voltage. That's one failure mode. Gives a higher voltage than required. That's another failure mode. So already I have given you two. You cannot use any of the examples that I have given. You have to come up with your own subsystems and functions and failure modes. What are the causes of the failure? If that failure happens, what is the final effect to the patient? Right? If the battery gives, let's say it's a 12 volt, it's required to give a uninterrupted steady power at 12 volts, and it doesn't do that, it gives more than 12, if it gives more than 15, whatever it is, what happens? What's the effect of that failure? If it's at 0, it doesn't charge overnight. What's the failure effect? Then there are these three things that's very important that you didn't see in the previous slide: the likelihood of occurrence, likelihood of detection, and severity. So let's say the likelihood of occurring is like very small. So you put like a really small number. Likelihood of detection is, if it happens, do you think we can identify it pretty easily? If that is the case, right, then it's not a big issue, right? And then the severity, if this happens, right, the effect, like maybe it electrocutes the patient. In that case, the severity is really high. So then you multiply these three numbers and you come up with this RPN number, risk priority number. And this number is what we will make our decisions based on. And then the final column says, what are the actions that you're going to take in the design phase, right? So this is a design FMEA. We are only going to consider the design. So nothing about the process of making this, but when you're designing this, on the design paper, on your paper, when you're designing this, when you're doing this model on CAD, right, SolidWorks or whatever CAD software you use, what are the ways that you can think about reducing the failure? Maybe it's in the calculation phase, right? Anything in the design phase can go here. But if it's a process, for example, maybe the process kind of failure is maybe the batteries were coming in a conveyor belt and somebody accidentally missed the battery and so the battery didn't get installed. That's a process failure, not a design failure. Do you understand the difference of the two? Just nod or say no. This is why I like you having your videos on and to see your smiles. Right? Do you understand what I'm going on about the difference between design and process? Right? Okay, take a screenshot of this and I will give you about 5 to 6 minutes. If you haven't put your group number, please put your group number and I'll open all the rooms, design, and one person report back about 2 of the subsystems and 3 failure modes for each. We don't have to go in order, but whichever group that wants to start, you cannot repeat the same things that another group repeated, right? So the groups that go first will have an advantage. Share about which subsystems. Just pick one, right? One subsystem that you discussed, its function, and the failure modes and what would happen to the patient if it fails. Just do one line. The group that said you haven't finished, that's okay, just pick one, right? So if another group has already shared what all the things that you discussed, you might have to come up with new things. So the groups that go first will have an advantage that way.
Okay, madam. So I'm from group 3, and my group came up with 2 subsystems. The first one is sensor system, and the other one is the mechanical system that governs the mechanisms of the wheelchair. So the functions of the sensor system is to identify like the external environmental parameters and give us suitable feedback to the user. And when it comes to the mechanical system, it is used mainly for the moving parts of the wheelchair and also to govern certain mechanisms.
Just do one. Don't do all.
Sorry?
Just do one line. Don't do all of it, just one. So just focus on the sensor system, one line in that sensor system.
So the reasons for the failure would be like due to change in environment factors, also the sensors won't work in the expected way. And also it can cause several harmful effects for the patient as well, because the sensor system is very important for the governing of the wheelchair. So it might cause severe damage to the patient as well.
Okay, how likely is this to occur? And how easy is it to identify?
So the likelihood is like around, we came up with like 5 to 6 maybe. And also the likelihood is detection is around maybe 7, because it's very obvious when it comes to sensor system in a wheelchair.
Okay. Right. Next group. So just to give a comment so that the other groups can improve upon this, you're still a little too shallow. So in the sensor module, you have different sensors, right? Can you name one sensor? And the other groups also can contribute to the discussion. Can you give one sensor example that would be inside the sensor system?
And should I give one?
Yeah, just one example of a sensor.
So like the accelerometer would be a good example because it controls the speed of the wheelchair.
Right. So in the sensor, so the sensor module is one subsystem. Inside the sensor module, you have the accelerometer. That's one part. And the function of that is to control the speed. If something goes wrong with that, what's going to happen?
So it will give like incorrect readings for the wheelchair to move, which might be harmful for the patient.
But you have to specify this, right? So these FMES, I spent 6 months doing this. And sometimes it gets to be a little bit cumbersome because you have to keep thinking of scenarios. What if, what if, what if? And even if there's a likelihood, like a 1% chance of this happening, you have to still put it in the FMEA, right? So in the regulatory authorities, they will look at that. So in that sensor module, in the accelerometer not working can be due to several causes, right? But what are the design issues that you can put down as causes? One is that you did not select the correct sensor for the humidity where it's operating. So especially in a country like Sri Lanka where humidity is really high, did you think about the humidity aspect when you selected the component? So this is a design issue. And then if you did not, what are the ways that it can fail? How severe is it? How likely is it? Are you able to detect it? And then how life-threatening is it to the patient? Do you understand how to fill one line now? Right? Okay, second group. This is one line. Huh?
So
So
I'm
the
Venu from
accelerometer, you have a second line, third line for the accelerometer, fourth line. Maybe you'll have like 10 lines just for the accelerometer. Humidity might have 2 lines. Temperature might have 2 lines. Power to the sensor might have 2 lines. Like that, you'll have a whole list. Sorry, I was cutting somebody off. Next group.
Yeah, I guess you. No, I'm going from group number 6. So the system we identify is the control unit, and the subsystem is the power regulation system. So the function is obviously the power regulation mode, and the failure mode we identify for this is the power failure from the data method error. And the failure cause can be actually instead of like higher than intended current or higher than intended voltage. And the failure effect would be obviously burning of the control unit. And the likelihood of occurrence that we gave for this particular error is actually 2, because the likelihood is actually a little bit low. And the likelihood of detection would be actually 10%. If such error occurs in the control unit, be very much detectable. And the severity that we gave for this error is actually 6, because it can severely affect the patient if he was using the wheelchair at the moment.
Thank you. One of the things I forgot to mention is that if you can detect it pretty easily, then the RPN should go down. So it's actually the inverse, right? Okay, next group. I want to quickly get like your ideas and move to the next one. Group 1.
So yeah, we are going with the joystick area, the motion control throttle of the wheelchair. So
Go ahead.
that's where you control the speed and the direction of the wheelchair. So the functionality is to indeed change the direction and go forward and brake and so on. And the failure mode, I believe that's if it stops working, if it goes in the wrong direction. And the failure causes could be like the bad handling of the controller, or maybe like dropping water in it, could be things like that. And then failure effect, that's again going the wrong direction and not moving and not responding properly to.
I'm going to
Right.
quickly disturb you and jump to the last column. What are the solutions for that?
So the solutions would be, well, the likelihood of that occurring is kind of depends on the manufacturer's quality. So the way to prevent that would be to properly read the manual and use it properly. Don't drop anything in the near the throttle.
Thank
Right.
you. So this is an example of what we say user issues, right? So clearly this is, so it's not a manufacturer problem, but clearly if they're putting water in this, there are two lines that I can think of. One is that you don't have an enclosure designed that is IP rated. Do you know what IP rating is? Yes or no? Right?
Water
IP rating,
resistance.
yes, like ingress protection, like your phones have an IP rating. If it's waterproof, it has a certain rating. It has two numbers, let's say IP68. Maybe if this is something that's going under a place where you put a water bottle, it needs to be IP68. But maybe they had like IP45 or something. So that's a design issue, right? So should it be IP rated? That's one design criteria that you can include as a solution. So if this was an issue, your corrective action would be enclosure is IP rated. Another issue that you brought up is the user factor, right? So the user might not have seen the proper or followed the proper instructions. So now there are two corrective actions that you can do. One is to give a manual, right? Actually, there are three different things. One is to give a manual and insist that the users go through a training process. Otherwise, you cannot operate this equipment. Third thing, have you heard of idiot proof? Have you heard that term? You make your equipment idiot proof, which means that even an idiot cannot break this system, right? There's a limit to it, but you make sure that if, let's say, if there are knobs that have to be turned, that the knobs have a limit. You cannot physically turn it any more than that, right? If there is like water that gets, if it's a place that, you know, a lot of water bottles or like chemicals or something is there, or maybe a lot of solutions that you use in hospital settings, it's going to be used in an environment like that, you make sure that it's waterproof. That way there's no way for the user to mishandle it. Then there are some things, even though you can give like a lot of privileges to the user to do, especially this comes into software aspect, you don't give them the controls. Because if you give the controls like unlimited controls to the user, it's a hazard. Somebody who does not know it or nurse who's really tired after a 12-hour shift can press the wrong thing. So instead of having 10 buttons, you only give one button. So these are things in the design phase that you can put to make sure that this doesn't end up in those failure modes. Right. I think we have 3 more groups. Let's quickly discuss one line each. Dr. Kulasimham, you were very, very wrong about your students. They're not talking. I would have finished the lecture by now at Ruhuna.
Madam, I'm from Google. Shall I play? So the subsystem we chose was the motor, and the function of it is moving the wheelchair, you know. So the failure mode we found is that it fails to operate or stops operating in a short time. So the cause of this failure is that the motor is using a high power, it has a high power consumption. So the failure effect is the wheelchair stops moving in a really short time.
And the solution?
So as the likelihood of occurrence,
Jump to
Yes,
the
and the
solution.
solution is okay. So we think that choosing a more energy efficient motor would be the solution for this problem.
Okay, right? So in the specifications, in that last column, you have to give the specifications of the motor. Right, next group.
Okay.
Yes, I will take it. I'm audible?
Yep.
Yeah, so we took the two subsystems like the suspension system and the controller system.
Okay.
So first about the suspension system, the suspension system, like if the damping of the spring system is not happening correctly, that's the issue. So the patient may feel pain or uncomfortable when using. So this may happen due to manufacturing problems, or if the patient like use the wheelchair in rough hard surfaces continuously, the problem may occur. As solutions, we suggest using protective guards for the suspension systems, or like maintaining the shock absorbers or repairing them after a certain time.
Right.
That's
you.
it for the suspension system.
Right.
So
Thank you. So just to give a comment,
the control.
that's enough. I just want one. Thank you. Right. Just because of the interest of time, I can. Dr. Kulasingham has said that I can go 5 minutes extra. For the design FMEA, every solution that you give has to be a design solution. So a manufacturing issue cannot be put in your design FMEA. That goes in the process FMEA. That's a completely separate thing. When you learn about manufacturing processes, you can talk about process FMEAs. For the design, yes, right? The size of the spring, the width of the spring. These are the specifications you can put for design issues in the suspension system. Right. I believe we have one more group.
Yes, ma'am. We have choose the control system. So the control system function is the inner motor wheelchair. They control the joystick. What function the joystick use, that function also controlled by the microcontroller in the control system. So the something failure happen, then all of the joystick command cannot be done by that in the wheelchair. So it's going to wrong go. And another, the rotation of the chairs, the motors control cannot be go the command for that motor, so they are not working properly. So the failures happen because whenever manufacturer design the PCB, sometimes the line they are draw that go into wrong pathway, or the soldering part also something maybe make mistake something. So the maybe signals collapse. Maybe the PCB design, the upper layer, they are draw the line to the processor, their signals interact with line, so this collapse the signals in that so that's so. And
what's the solution?
That have, so we so with the, so maybe it's come to PCB problem, we must redesign that one. That's because the microcontroller problem is going to affect all of the systems, so we must only change the PCB design or something. Microcontroller anything issue we cannot be done inside that hard happen, we cannot be analyze the inside one, so we totally change the controller system. Control system means the processor, so anything control system, maybe the RAM or storage cannot be happen, we can analyze that one, because anything in happen to the processor we cannot be analyze that one, so we can change that one.
So again, you come to a correct selection of your processor unit, right? You mentioned about the manufacturing issues in the PCB. Again, you cannot include that, but you can select the correct PCB design. You can change the circuit. You can change the layout of the circuit so that such mistakes don't happen. But the manufacturing part, you can't put in the design FMEA. Right, so all of you were giving, like, I think all the groups kind of had got the idea. I do believe this is going to be one of the things you have to do for your project. So usually FMEAs like will be 30, 40 60 pages long, just every single aspect. Just to give you one example of one of the FMEAs that I did, I was in charge of one of the shaver controllers. So for orthopedics, when they do any kind of surgery in the bones, you have to shave away all the debris, the muscles and all the ligaments and everything, and have a clean surface. So when you do that, you have a coolant that comes. So one of the issues in the design FMEA is that it could vibrate. So when it vibrates, it could heat up and it could heat the bone. So one of the lines for that was to make sure that you prevent vibration in that shaver controller. How to prevent vibration in that shaver controller is to make sure that the two parts, so you have like a part on top and then a part at the bottom, which gets connected and fixed through a bolt and a nut. Make sure that there's a correct washer design between the bolt and the nut to hold it fast. So to absorb that vibration, right? So do you understand how this becomes like all design issues? It's not a process issue. It wasn't that there was a manufacturing failure. No, you had to design the thickness and the material of that washer in a way that would absorb that vibration. All right, let me quickly finish this section and move on to the next subsection of my lecture today, which is risk management. So this is the second aspect. This is the part that I talked about, the severity, occurrence, and the detection of whatever your fault is. As I mentioned, these are all called like root cause analysis. You might see this in other ways. So in biomedical engineering regulatory aspect, it's always called FMEAs. Sometimes it's called FMECA, failure modes, effects, and criticality analysis, fault tree analysis, Ishikawa diagram, all of that. They're all the same concept, right? Some of these slides have a lot of words in it. Those I'm not going to read it out to you. I expect you to read them and come before the next lecture. I will send the slides out today itself. So here I have given an example for you to look at. Just for your knowledge, so please don't mix this up in this module. For your design class, this is not part of it, but a process FMEA. So in this example, you have a screw that has come loose, right? In the screw lock application, actually, let me take the soldering. There's a soldering problem. The soldering problem is not a design problem, it's a process. When they went to solder it, you could not have prevented it in the design phase. That happens in the process, so that goes in the PFMEA. This is something we call the risk management process. Again, the risk management plan itself, like these 5 aspects together, makes one big document, sometimes can be 100 of pages long. So you start off with somewhere, you have a risk management plan, you analyze and evaluate, do the risk controls, and then you have to make a risk management report. Once you do the risk management report, you go back to a post-market surveillance and see if whatever risks that you identified have actually been mitigated. And then you go back to the risk management plan to say, okay, now we can incorporate it as part of a process. So this whole process needs to be documented and submitted when you're trying to get approval for your products. How did we do the risk management process? Then, since I talked about the critical analysis, similar to as when I began the lecture, when you're selecting critical components and any other decision, you look at the safety, risk, and cost. So if this was a optimization problem, safety, which way should it go? Minimizing or maximizing safety? These are optimization problems, right? You have 3 parameters: safety, risk, and cost. So do you maximize the safety or minimize the safety when you're making decisions?
Maximize.
Maximize the safety. Risk.
Minimize.
Costs.
Minimize.
So you maximize the safety without increasing the, without increasing the risk and by minimizing the cost, right? So that kind of incorporates like the safety aspect of the design that you need to think of. This is actually part of the regulatory process, even though I completely separately added it. It should really go in somewhere here, right? So this is really the last lecture that I should have done. But I did it first because it's short and I can finish it within 1 hour. On Friday, we will start with ethics. Again, if we cooperate and talk and give answers quickly, the pauses in between will be minimized. Please read the IESL Code of Ethics and come. The rest of it I will teach you. Thank you very much. I will hang around for another 5 minutes in case you have questions. If not, the others, if you don't have questions, you're free to leave. And I will see you Friday. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prince, and thank you, students, for coming. So if there are any questions, you can stay or see you on Friday.